My name is Ron Fulner. I'm the current Town of Greenfield historian and also a member of the board of the Town of Greenfield Historical Society, which owns this museum. I'd like to welcome you all today to our little museum, and I'd like to share with you a little of the history of the building and the museum and the town that it's located in. This is the way this location would have looked in July of 1921. Instead of the vacant parking lot on the left side, we have the Middle Grove Baptist Church. On the right is the Oddfellows Hall, or IOOF Hall, where we now have our museum. This is Eugene Chatfield on the right and his wife Lee on the left. For many, many years, Eugene was the rural mail delivery person for the Middle Grove Post Office. He was also an officer in the Oddfellows, was instrumental in the Town of Greenfield Historical Society obtaining that property and making a museum out of it. We have divided the upstairs section of the museum into three general areas. The first area that we come to on the right, it deals with lumbering or logging history in the town of Greenfield. Directly across from that on the left is an area devoted to agriculture, and that includes the history of the Dake family, which is a very important part of the agricultural history of the town of Greenfield. And then further in the background are the service organizations, including the Oddfellows themselves and their local Middle Grove chapter, which of course was met in this space. This area of the museum is devoted to agriculture in the town of Greenfield, and more specifically this area that I'm standing in is devoted to the Dake family and Stewart's Ice Cream and Stewart's Shops that are very successful agricultural business in the town of Greenfield. And behind me on this wall and on this wall are photographs shared by local families, local farm families in the town of Greenfield. And early on, the town of Greenfield was primarily an agricultural town, and there were a number of small farms that were pretty much self-sufficient, and they even grew enough to harvest and sell a few products for a little cash income each year, which would keep the family going. And farming is very much a part of the history of the town of Greenfield, and fortunately these families, the Swartzes and the Eichhorst and so on, are very much a part of that history. The first thing you're going to notice as you enter the lumbering section of the museum are the tools of the trade. They would fell the trees with the axe, and they would chop the tree up into pieces with the axe. A more useful tool, a faster tool, which was the saw. And we have several types demonstrated here. The ones on the top are called crosscut saws, and they all are two-man saws. A man had to be on either end of the saw. And these saws were pushed forward and then pulled back, and so it was a lot of stop and go motion using these saws. first one of this type was not designed for cutting wood, but was designed for cutting human bone. During the Civil War, a great many amputations had to be performed, and they didn't really have a good anesthesia to put a person to sleep while they performed this surgery. So surgeons practiced and tried to perform it as quickly as possible so that the intense pain wouldn't last very long. And the very first chainsaw that was designed or invented was supposedly to cut human bone faster than a hand-operated saw. But then lumbermen began to get the idea around the time of the Civil War, and we began to get very early chainsaws. It's interesting to note that my grandfather spent all of his days, all of his adult days, working in the woods and working in a sawmill, and he was intensely interested in all the new machines that were coming down the road. And he once said that man will invent a lot of machines that will be run by motors, but one thing that they'll never be able to invent is a machine that you can take right into the woods and cut trees down with. Well, he was wrong in that prediction. In the 1930s, many of the people living in the town of Greenfield were small-scale farmers and wood choppers, or in many cases they did both seasonally. And of course they were interested in chopping and lumbering techniques. So when the sportsman shows that were held in Amsterdam, New York, started in 1933, the shows started on a very small scale, simply a pancake supper and a few entertainers, and it grew and became very popular. My father went on and performed in these shows up until World War II broke out, and during the war they discontinued the shows because most of the young men who would have competed were either busy cutting wood for the war effort. Most lumbermen and farmers were both deferred during the war because the authorities felt that their service was more important at home than it was overseas fighting. One of his fans, when he was chopping in the shows in Amsterdam, was an engineer who worked at the General Electric Company, and after watching my father chop a few times, he became very concerned about just a slight slip or misjudgment. He could easily cut the end of his foot off with this powerful axe. So being an engineer, he went back to the shop and designed and built these heavy-duty stainless steel foot coverings and presented them to my father. And my father practiced with them on a few occasions, but found that they distracted him and hampered his movement, and so he never actually used them in a competition. Since we're in the Oddfellows Hall, let's concentrate on the Oddfellows as a group. And they are a very old organization. They're still in existence today. But let me give you a little background history about the Oddfellows. This organization was very strong and prospering. They were a service organization who took care of the sick and needy. You have to realize when this organization started in America, there was no such thing as Social Security or any kind of monetary benefits for people in need. Most of the young men and men of all ages in the community belonged to the organization. It wasn't a religious organization per se, but they did use the Bible and refer to the Bible in many of their meetings and activities. I hope that this little movie will give you a nice little introduction to the museum, and I hope you will spend some time just taking your time and looking at the many displays that our hardworking volunteers have put together for you.
I'm a roving cowboy, far away from home, far from the prairie where I used to roam, where the doggies wander and the wind blows free. Hear the cowboys singing on the lone prairie. Give me back my saddle, give me back my gun, give me back that bronco that I used to run. Let me lay my blanket by a peaceful stream. Hear the cowboys singing on the lone prairie. Oh, bury me now on the lone prairie, where the coyotes howl and the wind blows free. And when I die, you can bury me 'neath the western sky on the lone prairie.